Hello. Happy New Year. Happy 2023. So as you can tell by the sound or lack thereof of my voice, I'm not sick, but I had a great New Year's. I celebrated. I'm super excited for what's in store for 2023, both in my life and in this channel, and I hope you had a happy and safe New Year as well. So I'm not sick. I'm just a tiny bit hoarse, but regardless, the show must go on. And I'm so excited to talk to you guys finally about today's topic, which is sampling. So lately, sampling has been a pretty hot topic in the music industry, which I find kind of interesting because there's nothing new about sampling. Artists have been doing it for decades. And it seems like lately there has been a sort of renewed criticism and dislike of sampling, maybe not necessarily the practice of sampling itself, but in how it's being done. So in this video, I do want to talk about the history of sampling as well as how it's evolved over the years. And I also really do want to shed light on sampling as a valid musical technique, and because a lot of people just sort of have the idea that if an artist samples, it means that they're lazy or that they're not creative, and that's not necessarily true. And so I want to give you guys a little bit more insight as to why that's not true. So let's go ahead and get into it. The earliest form of sampling dates back to 1940s France, where artists recorded and spliced different sounds like trains, utensils, and the human body in order to make sound collages. In the 1960s, sampling became popular among Jamaican reggae producers who DJ'd over recordings of other reggae tracks. When many of these producers immigrated to the United States in the 70s, they introduced this technique to hip-hop artists. Before computers and the internet, instruments called samplers were used. Samplers can record other instruments, sounds, and songs in order to create something new. Several samplers also had the capacity to change the speed or pitch of a recording in order to further transform the sample. By the 70s, samples could be made and recorded digitally rather than through an analog tape recording inside of the sampler. Sampling is a foundation for hip-hop, meaning it increased in popularity in the 80s as hip-hop also became more popular. Sampling in hip-hop was considered a lot of Black Americans' answer to punk, as it was both a subversive and homegrown genre at the time. Thanks to sampling, a hip-hop artist could create an entire track without studio time or fancy producers. They could self-produce a song with records and whatever sounds they had on hand. It also meant that artists who weren't trained to play instruments or who couldn't afford a band could still incorporate those sounds in their music. Traditionally, and even today, hip-hop samples other songs or other popular genres like jazz, Motown, and funk. In this sense, sampling was a new art form that was created out of necessity, but still it allowed for artists to create music that sounded fresh, complex, and current. In addition, sampling was also a way for artists to make reference to and give credit to a lot of their musical influences. Moving further into the 80s, sampling became an even more solidified aspect of hip-hop culture. Artists like Dr. Dre, Q-Tip, and Public Enemy all use samples in their music. For example, NWA and Public Enemy both sampled James Brown's Funky Drummer, more specifically the drum break performed by Clyde Stubblefield. NWA sampled it in Fuck the Police, and Public Enemy used it in Fight the Power. Fun fact, the Powerpuff Girls theme song also samples Funky Drummer. Different from today, it was common for artists to use the same samples pretty much at the same time. Nowadays, if a song used a sample, especially a noticeable one, other artists would probably shy away from using it for a little while. In addition, artists sometimes use the same sample on multiple songs, sometimes just using different parts of the song. Not only does Public Enemy use the Funky Drummer sample in Fight the Power, but also in Bring the Noise. And that isn't even the only sample that Fight the Power contains. It actually contains 22 samples. Public Enemy's 1990 song Welcome to the Terror Dome contains 20 samples. Several recordings released at the time contain multiple samples, with dozens sometimes being on just one song. The Beastie Boys' 1989 album Paul's Boutique contains over 100 samples. The fact that one song can contain so many samples might still have you wondering, what exactly is a sample? Because at first it just seems impossible that one song can contain so many. But simply put, a sample is just when one sound recording is used in another. Of course, the most common example of sampling is when a clip from one song is used in another song. Sometimes the lyrics are included, but often it's just the instrumental that's sampled. This differs from interpolation, which is when an artist recreates part of another song themselves. An example that I brought up recently is when Frank Ocean interpolates Mary J. Blige's Real Love in Super Rich Kids. He sings the lyrics himself and changes the melody slightly, which is normal for an interpolation. However, if Frank inserted the original recording of Mary singing, even if it was altered, that would be considered a sample. Instrumentals can also be interpolated. On Break My Heart, Dua Lipa interpolates the guitar melody from INXS's song Need You Tonight. It's not the original recording, but it's still clearly an intentional inclusion of part of INXS's song. Another popular example is Ariana Grande's Seven Rings, which interpolates both the lyrics and melody from My Favorite Things. Samples don't have to be musical. They could be a part of a speech, people talking or cheering, or even the sounds of a car crash or something like that. Perfect examples of non-musical samples are when Kanye West and Jay-Z sampled Blades of Glory in their song N-Words in Paris.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It
gets the people going.
Or when J. Cole sampled George W. Bush in his song No Role Models.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
Another popular and iconic example is when Timbaland sampled the sort of crying or happy laughing baby sound in Are You That Somebody? Of course, sampling is sort of a muddy territory for the sheer fact that it involves artists using others' work in their own. In 1991, a court case arising from this very issue changed the nature of sampling. In his song Alone Again, rapper Biz Markie sampled a song of the same name, which belonged to an Irish artist named Gilbert O'Sullivan. The court sided with O'Sullivan, meaning that Biz Markie would have to forfeit his royalties from the song since he included the sample without consent. This set the precedent that artists now had to clear samples, otherwise known as getting the rights to a song. This also established that sampling without clearing it first was plagiarism, rather than just a foundation for creating a new song, as many artists had considered it prior. There was a growing stigma around sampling, with many claiming that it was lazy and uncreative. A lot of people also claim that sampling was derivative and didn't require as much creativity or talent as it did to make an original song. Also, a lot of people claim that because hip-hop promoted sampling, and sampling was a common part of hip-hop culture, that it was encouraging people to break the law. But if you know anything about how the American public has felt about hip-hop, especially back in the 80s and 90s, that probably is not a surprise to you. The decision of this court case didn't at all put an end to sampling. It did mean that samples for popular songs became harder to acquire, as clearing them could be a lengthy and expensive process. Because of this, it became more popular for artists to sample smaller artists so that they could pay less, or in some cases, not at all. Interpolation also became more popular, as well as recreating music as closely as possible without getting a lawsuit. Despite it all, some of the most popular songs of the 90s include samples. Some of hip-hop's most prominent artists, including Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, Biggie, Tupac, and Ice Cube, all released songs that contain samples. On the screen is a list of popular 90s songs that contain samples, and this is just to name a few because there are hundreds of others. You've probably also noticed that several of these songs have since been sampled or interpolated by artists in the 21st century. Jay-Z was no stranger to sampling in the 90s and has continued to sample throughout his career. His 1998 song Hard Knock Life, Ghetto Anthem, samples Hard Knock Life from the musical Annie. The sample echoes Jay-Z's lyrics in which he talks about his rough upbringing and how fame turned his life around. Though the orphans in Annie lead difficult lives too, there's still something almost silly and funny about little girls singing on a track where Jay-Z raps about drugs, violence, and having friends who went to jail. Jay-Z was actually praised for going in a different direction with the sample by choosing a Broadway song. He said his request for the Hard Knock Life sample was initially turned down. He then wrote a letter explaining the importance of the sample. He said about this, "We might not all have literally been orphans, but a whole generation of us had basically raised ourselves in the streets. So I decided to write the company a letter myself. I made up this story about how when I was a 7th grader in Bed-Stuy, our teacher held an essay contest and the 3 best papers won the writers a trip to the city to see Annie. A lie. I wrote that as kids in Brooklyn, we hardly ever came into the city. True. I wrote that from the moment the curtain came up, I felt like I understood Honey's story. Of course, I'd never been to see Annie on Broadway, but I had seen the movie on TV. Anyway, they bought it, cleared it, and I had one of my biggest hits." In their review, Slant Magazine said about Hard Knock Life, "The source material and the resulting product may seem diametrically opposed, but they end up being fundamentally about the same thing. forming a common thread of struggles with poverty spun into gold. Hard Knock Life was nominated for Best Rap Solo Performance at the 1999 Grammys and has been considered one of the best songs of the 90s. Moving into the new millennium, some of the most popular songs continue to use samples in several clever ways. Similar to their predecessors, several songs sampled classics, especially those from artists who could afford to clear them. I think the 2000s is where we really see the effects of sampling being less democratized, for better or worse. Now that samples needed to be cleared, it became harder for the average artist to use them. Of course, they could sample tracks illegally and risk being sued, or missing out on money from the song if it blew up. Naturally, this led to bigger artists and labels acquiring samples from prominent artists because they could afford to pay for it or they could afford to forfeit the royalties. There were also instances where samples were cleared specifically because a prominent artist wanted them. Kanye West might be one of the best examples of sampling in the 2000s. Throughout his career, Kanye sampled many of the greats including Lauryn Hill, Marvin Gaye, Etta James, Elton John, Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra, Nina Simone, and Daft Punk. One of Kanye's best-known uses of sampling, 2005's Gold Digger, samples Ray Charles' I Got a Woman. The woman Ray Charles talks about in his song, one who helps him and expects nothing in return, is pretty much the opposite sort of woman Kanye raps about. This is emphasized by the lyric change in the intro. Charles' original version reads, I got a woman way over town that's good to me. She give me money when I'm in need, yeah, she's a kind of friend indeed. I got a woman way over town that's good to me. Kanye's version reads, she takes my money when I'm in need, yeah, she's a trifling friend indeed. Oh, she's a gold digger way over town that digs on me. This interpolation was sung by Jamie Foxx and was recorded in case the Ray Charles sample wasn't cleared. Of course, both were used on the final version of the song. Gold Digger was critically acclaimed, and to this day it's one of Kanye's most popular songs. It topped the Hot 100 and also earned Kanye a Grammy for Best Rap Solo Performance. Another song of Kanye's that uses a sample is Through the Wire. The song is the lead single from his debut album, The College Dropout. It samples Chaka Khan's 1985 song Through the Fire. In the song, Kanye raps about his jaw being wired shut as a result of a car accident after leaving the studio. He recorded Through the Wire just 2 weeks after the accident, with his jaw still wired shut. Initially, Chaka Khan didn't approve of the sample until her son showed her Kanye's music video. Though she spoke positively about the sample when it came out, she called it stupid back in 2019. Through the Wire was considered a bold debut for West and a promise of musical genius to come. Rolling Stone listed it as one of the best debut records of all time, and Pitchfork named it in the top 500 songs to have been released from the punk era to present. Through the Wire was nominated for a Grammy for Best Rap Solo Performance, but it ironically lost to Jay-Z's 99 Problems. 99 Problems actually contains 6 different samples, including Ice-T's 99 Problems and LL Cool J's To the Break of Dawn. In their collaborations, Jay-Z and Kanye frequently use samples. Several songs from their joint album Watch the Throne actually use samples. Their song Otis samples Otis Redding's Try a Little Tenderness. Fergalicious is another iconic 2000s song born out of sampling. Though it samples 5 different songs, the most noticeable one is JJ Fad's Supersonic. Fergalicious samples the beat, and Fergie uses the same flow on the track. Fergalicious is one of Fergie's most popular songs, and one that still gets played regularly at parties and events. I actually just heard it this weekend for New Year's. Fergalicious received positive reviews and was celebrated both as a hip-hop and dance-pop song. Fergalicious peaked at number 2 on the Hot 100, just behind Beyoncé's Irreplaceable. A lot of the most popular pop and R&B songs of the 2000s have samples too. Destiny's Child's Bootylicious samples Stevie Nicks' Edge of 17, which Miley Cyrus later interpolated for her song Midnight Sky. Beyoncé's solo debut, Crazy in Love, samples the Shy Lights song Are You My Woman. Rihanna, who was still early in her career at the time, used several samples in her songs as well. Please Don't Stop the Music samples Michael Jackson's Wanna Be Startin' Something. SOS samples the music from Soft Cell's Tainted Love. In addition, one of her most famous songs, Umbrella, makes use of a sample from the Apple app GarageBand. Run This Town, Jay-Z's song with his 2 Rock Nation artists, Kanye and Rihanna, also uses a sample. The Queen of Pop, Madonna, sampled ABBA's Gimme Gimme Gimme, A Man After Midnight on her song Hung Up. Madonna reached out personally to the songwriters, ABBA members Benny and Bjorn, to clear the sample. They agreed on the condition that they would receive a large portion of Hung Up's royalties. This was only the second time that ABBA ever cleared a sample, and they did it out of respect for Madonna as a pop icon. Hung Up uses the disco influence from Gimme 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 and blends it with dance house and 80s pop to create a song that's fun and carefree and just as fresh as it is nostalgic. Hung Up was considered a song that proved Madonna capable of still putting out pop hits after nearly 2 decades. Slant magazine said about Hung Up, "It had been years since Madge sounded this vapid. With its pitched up vocals, infectious arpeggio sample from ABBA's Gimme Gimme Gimme, and the bridge's unironic, archetypical key change, the track decidedly points to the past, and it proved that 20 years into her career, Madonna was still the one and only dancing queen." MIA's massive 2008 hit, Paper Planes, samples The Clash's Straight to Hell. The iconic gunshot sound used in the song is also a sample taken from a sound effects library that Hollywood actually uses for their films. One of my favorite songs that uses a sample is Jason Derulo's What You Say, which came out back in 2009. The song samples Imogen Heap's Hide and Seek, a song which has taken a life of its own since appearing in the OC and the subsequent memes and skits. Moving into the 2010s, especially the latter half, it seems like the sort of respect and appreciation for sampling decreased. That doesn't mean that artists stopped sampling, because of course they didn't, but when I was looking at articles that were talking about some of the best musical samples in pop, R&B, and hip-hop, I did start to notice a trend. Though I intentionally looked at articles that were either written in the later 2010s or in the 2020s, very few songs from that time period were included in these lists. And there's no concrete answer as to whether these songs from this time period that use samples are inherently worse than previous ones, but it does seem like, in general, a lot of them are treated that way. Pop Heads has distinguished a lot of these contemporary samples as lazy samples. On the positive side, this shows respect for sampling as an art form, but less respect for the way that current artists are doing it. One of the major criticisms was that artists aren't transforming the samples as much, which makes them sound lazy. But several songs from prior decades have used samples that were barely transformed, and they didn't receive the same criticism. Part of me thinks it's not really about how easily a sample can be recognized, but how well the artist is able to transform it into a new song. So not necessarily transforming the specific sample, but how well an artist can create an original song from that sample. I would argue that the 2010s has a lot of successful samples too, albeit maybe less. I think 2 strong examples from the 2010s are Kanye West's Blood on the Leaves, which samples Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, as well as Kendrick Lamar's I, which samples the Isley Brothers' That Lady. Both songs are overt in their use of sampling and make no attempt to hide it. But the contributions that Kanye and Kendrick make to the songs in terms of composition and lyrics makes their artistic merit shine just as much as the artist that they're sampling. Some of Kendrick's most popular songs like Money Trees, Bitch Don't Kill My Vibe, King Kunta, Mad City, and Backseat Freestyle all use samples. I think both Kendrick and Kanye are great examples of how sampling can't always be called lazy. Their music shows how a sample can't and shouldn't be doing all the work in a song. Other elements still need to be added to the production, and the lyricism still needs to be there. Artists who are truly talented can take these recognizable songs, or at least parts of them, and still create music that stands on its own. Another example of a well-used sample is Ariana Grande's Break Your Heart Right Back, which samples Diana Ross's I'm Coming Out. In his feature on the song, Childish Gambino also interpolates Mo Money Mo Problems, which also samples I'm Coming Out. On Hotline Bling, Drake samples Timmy Thomas's Why Can't We Live Together. Though the song is about dysfunction on the global scale, Drake scales things down in Hotline Bling to talk about the dysfunction in a relationship. Several of his other songs like Started From the Bottom, Nice for What, and Passion Fruit all contain samples as well. In 2017, DJ Khaled sampled Santana's Maria Maria on Wild Thoughts. Rihanna was the perfect choice for Wild Thoughts because she has that dark, alluring aura to her that matches Santana's vibe perfectly. Cardi B's I Like It Like That samples the song of the same name by Pete Rodriguez. When it first came out, I remember thinking one of the best things about the song is how intelligent the sample choice was. Cardi uses it to pay homage to her Latin heritage. Though she's Dominican and Trinidadian and Pete is Puerto Rican, both were raised in the Bronx. I Like It infuses the instrumental with hip-hop, but it still retains its Latin influence. I think this is one of Cardi's best songs simply because it captures her personality well and celebrates her roots. The track also includes features from J Balvin, who's Colombian, and Bad Bunny, who is Puerto Rican. An artist who receives a lot of criticism for sampling is Saweetie. This is because all of her most popular songs contain samples. Her breakout song Icy Girl samples Kaya's My Neck, My Back. My Type samples Freak a Leak, while Tap In samples Blow the Whistle. I remember around the time that Tap In came out, a lot of people on social media were saying that Saweetie's career was in trouble if she kept sampling. I think the primary issue isn't that Saweetie samples, but that sampling is risky if you're not necessarily creating music that can supersede its association with the sample. As fun as they are, I don't think a lot of Saweetie songs do that, and to me the only exception is probably Icy Girl. Saweetie gained the reputation of only using samples based off of just 3 songs, which compared to a lot of artists really isn't that many. But I think the issue is that these are pretty much the only songs that people know Saweetie for. I think that also makes it easy for people to claim these songs only became popular mostly due to the recognition of the samples. Saweetie has said about her use of sampling, "It goes back to, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. I flip songs very well. It's my specialty, it's what I'm good at. So I will continue to keep taking big hits and making them mine, and I'll continue to make my own hits." About putting out original music, she said, "When Pretty Bitch music comes along, I do have some original beats that I'm so excited to share because I feel like it'll not only be, oh, Saweetie makes great sample songs, it'll be she makes great songs, period." Unfortunately, it seems that few people have paid Saweetie's original songs as much attention as her songs with samples. The only true exception I can think of is Best Friend, which Doja Cat features on. Saweetie also appeared on Charli XCX's Out Out, which samples Stromae's Alors on Danse. I saw people also calling this sample lazy, which I find odd because the song isn't that much different sonically from the remix version with Kanye, and a lot of people, myself included, love that version of Alors on Danse. In the 2020s, artists continued sampling, of course. Several popular songs sampled songs that were popular in the 2000s thanks to the Y2K trend. Artists also sampled other songs from genres that were becoming popular again, like funk and disco. An example that was inescapable on TikTok is Jack Harlow's First Class, which samples Fergie's Glamorous. I think seeing some people didn't even know that Jack used a sample in the song is genuinely one of the first times that I started feeling old. Though I'm always going to be partial to Glamorous, I still think the sample was used well. This is because First Class would be a decent song without the sample, and therefore Jack isn't relying on it. Rather, he uses it to enhance the wealthy and glamorous lifestyle he's rapping about. Much like Glamorous, First Class talks about Jack's change in lifestyle due to fame. In the chorus, he uses call and response to make double entendres out of Fergie's spelling in order to add new meaning to it. The Glamorous sample isn't doing the heavy lifting in First Class, and so it feels like a reference rather than the song's backbone. A song review that I personally found unnecessarily harsh called First Class a reimagining of Glamorous, and although it wasn't their intention, I do think reading that article helped me decide, for me personally, what sets a good sample apart from a bad one. A good sample should reimagine or reinterpret a song and simultaneously be used to world build for the artist's own song, and I do think that Glamorous does that in First Class. Of course, First Class is not my favorite hip-hop song ever, but that doesn't mean that I'm at all mad at the sample. Another example of a sample being used to reimagine a song is Gaga's Replay, which samples Diana Ross's It's My House. Replay was actually the first song created on Chromatica, as the producer Burns initially created the instrumental for a different project. Giving it to Gaga was perfect since she's an artist that's openly taken inspiration from artists from the 70s and 80s, but adds her own fresh spin. The Diana Ross sample is ever present, though it's been sped up, and the disco fits with the electronic and dance pop of the song. To me, the sample makes Replay sound fuller and builds anticipation for the chorus. The songs are tonally different, with Diana being proud and at peace and Gaga sounding distressed. However, just as Diana is the owner of the house she lives in, Gaga is the owner and creator of the thoughts that trap her, like being stuck inside of a home. I also think there's perfect irony in using a disco sample in a song called Replay. Coincidentally, Replay is the only song on Chromatica that contains a sample. I initially thought 911 sampled Can't Get You Out of My Head, but apparently I was wrong. It's no coincidence that 2 of last year's biggest female rap songs use samples. Lotto's Big Energy samples the Tom Tom Club's 1981 song Genius of Love. Mariah Carey also sampled Genius of Love for her 1995 song Fantasy, which is why you hear a lot of people saying that Lotto sampled Mariah on Big Energy. Lotto references Fantasy both in her rap and in the interpolated lyrics in the chorus, but it's not Mariah's original beat. But I think that's what's great about sampling and music in general, that a certain instrumental or set of lyrics can be reimagined and interpreted in so many different ways. Lotto was praised for experimenting with a pop sound and ultimately creating a song that was playful, groovy, and nostalgic. Big Energy earned Lotto her first top 10 entry on the Hot 100. It also marked the first time a female rapper held the top spot in pop, rhythm, and urban radio with the same song. Currently, Big Energy is nominated for Best Melodic Rap Performance at the Grammys. Lotto and Mariah also teamed up for the remix, which I think was perfectly played. Last year, Nicki Minaj achieved a career milestone, earning her first #1 song in her career with Super Freaky Girl, which of course samples Rick James' Super Freak. The song debuted at #1 on the Hot 100 and broke a Spotify record for biggest debut for a solo female rap song. Several critics enjoyed Super Freaky Girl, with many considering it a return to the playful, poppy, and raunchy rap Nicki had become known for. And not to touch on the controversy too heavily, but in my honest opinion, there's no way you can't call this a rap song. What is Nicki doing on this track other than rapping? What is Nicki doing on this track other than rapping? I'll wait. Nicki is no stranger to a sample. Her most popular use of a sample is undoubtedly Anaconda, which samples Sir Mix-a-Lot's Baby Got Back. Nicki uses the sample to create a song that oozes self-confidence and love for her body. In their review, Vox points out that throughout Anaconda, Nicki is in constant conversation with Baby Got Back, speaking about men the way that women are spoken about in that song. To some, Anaconda was Nicki reclaiming the sample to create a female empowerment anthem. All the negative reviews I found about Anaconda were critiquing the song's subject matter and calling it degrading, because that's all you really can criticize on the song potentially, because Nicki's rap is solid. Anaconda was Nicki's highest charting song at the time, reaching #2 in the Hot 100. I distinctly remember this being the song that made a lot of people take Nicki seriously, even though she had 2 albums full of hits under her belt prior. I truly think it's sad that Anaconda is one of the songs that Nicki regrets recording, along with songs like Super Bass as well as Your Love, which samples Annie Lennox's No More I Love Yous. And I honestly think that this is because people tried to downplay Nicki's rap skills because they claimed her music was pop, as if an artist can't mix 2 genres and be good at it like she was. Anaconda truly is great, and it's a feat to sample one of the most recognizable hip-hop songs and not only hold your own in the song, but have it be one of the strongest in your discography as well. When artists sample, and especially with a well-known song, it does set up a comparison between those 2 artists. And it's completely normal and within human nature to compare, especially when you're listening to 2 artists on a song. And I do think that this tendency to make comparisons is higher, especially when someone is personally fond of the song that's being sampled. To an extent, I do think that some artists set themselves up by choosing a sample that, while popular, is still going to set them up for failure by comparison. And I think that that's easier to do now more than ever because thanks to streaming and social media, I would assume that a lot of people today are familiar with way more songs than the average person was decades ago. And so that increases the likelihood that someone is familiar with or has heard the song that's being sampled. And even if they haven't heard it, they can easily go look it up and then make those comparisons. I think a way to escape this and still use a popular sample is just to not take yourself too seriously. A perfect example of this is Saucy Santana's Booty featuring Lotto, which samples Crazy in Love. Part of the reason people were so interested in the song was because they were so impressed that Saucy Santana's team was able to clear Beyoncé's sample. And once the song was released, it went viral and a lot of people actually did like it. Booty works because Saucy Santana doesn't take himself too seriously. The song gives off just for fun vibes, and it's so obvious he's not trying to create a piece of music that's as culturally significant as Crazy in Love. In every live performance, you can tell Saucy is just there to have a great time and just happy to be there. The performances also remind me of how a lot of us dance in our rooms with our friends to Beyoncé. Another recent example that I also think fits this idea is Bikini Bottom, Ice Spice's song that literally samples SpongeBob. Sirius and SpongeBob don't really go in the same sentence, and I think that makes the sample a lot easier to swallow. But still, Ice Spice manages to make it work. I think it's because her flow is laid back and matter of fact, so it doesn't clash with the SpongeBob sample, which is already pretty busy. Also, Ice Spice is rapping about how she's basically that girl, and it's very obvious. So in a sense, the SpongeBob sample emphasizes this fact and subtly implies that you're as goofy as SpongeBob if you don't see it. I also feel like thanks to TikTok, music mashups have surged in popularity, and that's going to encourage artists to continue to incorporate parts of different songs in their own. A good example of this that went viral on TikTok a little while ago is Erica Banks' Buss It, which samples Nelly's Hot in Here. And if artists on social media are doing this, labels will definitely continue sampling, not that they ever stopped. Personally, I believe that a lot of these more current songs that use samples really aren't that terrible, but they're overly disliked because of the time that they were released in. People likely have a lower tolerance for sampling in this day and age because it seems like all media is basically a sample at this point. Everything is a reboot or remake or adaptation or meant to bank on nostalgia rather than offer something new. So since we're used to a lot of these projects being lazy, it's easy to assume that several of the songs using samples are also lazy, when not all are. All in all, sampling is a technique that has been and will continue to be a regular part of music. Several artists that we consider the greats and legends and icons all have dozens and dozens of samples within their discography, and we don't treat them like they're copycats or like they're lacking in artistry or creativity in any way. Several songs that use samples have since become classics and great songs in their own right. In many cases, samples provide a collage of an artist's musical inspirations. In other cases, artists choose samples that reflect the theme of their songs and use them as a bridge between the song and its message. When I feel like a sample fails is when they aren't included for these reasons, but just for the recognition and popularity. I think the criticism around sampling being lazy is better directed at artists and producers themselves rather than the actual practice of sampling. A talented artist or producer would still make decent music without sampling, and most songs that are considered bad would still be bad without the sample. It's also easier to say samples have gotten worse over time when we're less likely to remember all the terrible songs that included samples. Samples also show how music evolves and are a good way to reintroduce current generations to music of eras past. It keeps a lot of these songs alive as it not only reimagines them but often sparks interest in the original version too. Sampling is another reminder that music is fluid, and like any other art form, creators are constantly in conversation with and drawing upon one another. So that's what I have for you guys today on the subject of sampling. I eventually want to do a video on song plagiarism, which I did touch on very briefly. As always, thank you dolls so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you can stick around for more. And if you would like to become a channel member and have access to those perks, be sure to click the join button on my channel or the link in the description of this video. Again, thank you so very much for watching, and I will see you very soon. Bye bye.